if we have a house here. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 15th day of the session, Tuesday, January 31st, 2023. I was going to take a look, since we're short a lot of people, I was just going to take a look at today in history. So today in history, January 31st, 1917, the Indian paintbrush is chosen as the state flower. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Allemand. Allemand.
Excused.
Allred. Andrew.
Excused.
Angelos. Banks. Bear.
Excused.
Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron.
Excused.
Chadwick. Chestick. Clouston. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner.
Excused. Oh, Heiner's there.
Henderson. Hornock. Knapp. Jennings. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke.
Excused.
Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup.
Excused.
Oakley.
Excused.
Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer.
Excused.
Strock.
Excused.
Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin. Swanitzer Dan. Swanitzer Dave. Speaker Summers.
Here.
Allemand. Andrew. Bear. Byron. Locke. Northrup. Oakley. Storer. Strock.
Chief, I think we'll just leave that open until after we've done play ball. So I would like to welcome Reverend Bob Thompson from the First Presbyterian Church for our prayer of the day. Please rise.
Good morning. Hear these words from Psalm 100. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God. It is God that made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Let us pray. Glorious God of all worlds, we come before you at the beginning of a new day with a renewed sense of your calling as representatives of the people in Wyoming, but more importantly, representatives of your kingdom. In 2 Corinthians, you have called us to be your ambassadors, appealing for grace and reconciliation in the world through our lives and through our work. Today, Lord, I lift up these women and men, representatives doing the work that you have called them to through the citizens of this great state. God of grace, as you cause the sun to rise, bringing light into darkness, send the light of your Spirit to dawn in our souls and to dispel all darkness from our being. Give us your grace that we may reflect your glory. Let your love show through our deeds, and may your peace shine in our words. Lord of all creation, as we look around, we see the abundance of your work. You have provided plenty of resources for all living things. We see the splendor of your world. God, guide us as stewards in our use of all that you have provided, that all people and future generations may enjoy the bounty of your creation. As we live in this great state, we are thankful for the beauty that surrounds us. Almighty and gracious God, you call for justice and equity for the people of this world. You call us as your people to support the weak, to help those who suffer, and to honor all people. You have commanded us to live in peace by loving you and loving our neighbors. We remember these words from St. Francis: Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me show charity. Where there is error, truth. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is sadness, joy. And where there is darkness, let me bring light. God, fill us with your light. Empower us to reflect your light into the world. God, I pray for the work of these representatives today. Give them the peace that only you can give. Give them focused energy, ears to hear and hearts open to your calling. Guide them in every decision they make. Give them patience and understanding as they debate and make decisions. I pray all this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Thompson. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I hope you have a good win.
There was no national. No, boy, I had an ag advisor drove it into my brain. I forgot it. Did you get there? 40 for me.
I am not as good as these guys. I'm with you.
The House will please come to order. Journal Committee report. Oh, let's finish roll first. Thank you.
Oakley.
Oakley.
Storer. Strock. Strock. 62 present.
Yep. Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of January 30th, 2023 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Chestick and Ward.
We're at that order of business of introduction, reading, and reference of bills. So this is the last day House bills will be introduced, and then from here on out, it'll be Senate bills that get introduced at that time of crossover. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 101.
House Bill 101, sponsored by Representative Crago.
First reading of the bill.
Uniform Trust Code Amendments.
House Bill 101 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 262.
House Bill 262, sponsored by Representative Washit.
First reading of the bill.
Wyoming Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
House Bill 262 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 250.
House Bill 250, sponsored by Representative Jennings.
First reading of the bill.
Stop Red Flags Act.
House Bill 250 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 267.
House Bill 267, sponsored by Representative Knapp.
First reading of the bill.
Conveyances to United States, rights of refusal by state.
House Bill 267 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 216.
House Bill 216, sponsored by Representative Zawanitzer Dan.
First reading of the bill.
Residential rental properties applicability.
House Bill 216 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 238.
House Bill 238, sponsored by Representative Northrup.
First reading of the bill.
Probate, discovered property publication requirements.
House Bill 238 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 260.
House Bill 260, sponsored by Representative Pendergraft.
First reading of the bill.
Wyoming Firearms Research Institute Oversight Commission.
House Bill 238 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. The next bill for our consideration is, just a second. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 247.
House Bill 247, sponsored by Representative Newsom.
First reading of the bill.
Trophy game animals, wanton waste.
House Bill 247 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. The next bill for our consideration is House Joint Resolution 10.
House Joint Resolution 10, sponsored by Representative Chestick.
First reading of the bill.
Political expenditures, 2.
House Joint Resolution 10 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 275.
House Bill 275, sponsored by Representative Brown.
First reading of the bill.
Highway maintenance, equity, electrical vehicle metering.
House Bill 275 is referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 132.
House Bill 132, sponsored by Representative Zawanitzer Dan.
First reading of the bill.
Wyoming Housing Trust Fund.
House Bill 132 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 252.
House Bill 252, sponsored by Representative Yin.
First reading of the bill.
Regulation of propane delivery contracts.
House Bill 252 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 282.
House Bill 282, sponsored by Representative Bear.
First reading of the bill.
Critical infrastructure resiliency.
House Bill 282 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 286.
House Bill 286, sponsored by Representative Nicholas.
First reading of the bill.
ETS consolidation.
House Bill 286 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 263.
House Bill 263, sponsored by Representative Zawanitzer Dan.
First reading of the bill.
Restoration of voting rights amendments.
House Bill 263 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor. All right, let me get the, see if I got a majority floor leader here. Where do we got, committee announcements? Yeah, reports from standing committees.
House Bill 167, sponsored by Representative Henderson. Wyoming Teacher Shortage Loan Repayment Program, an act relating to education. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 2 Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 167, Wyoming Teacher Shortage Loan Repayment Program, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Zawanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. House Bill 214, sponsored by Representative Andrew. General Regulatory Sandbox Program, an act relating to economic development. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 2 Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 214, General Regulatory Sandbox Program, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Zawanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
All right, we are at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. Just a second. Chairman Eklund, do we have a re-referral?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to re-refer House Bill 188 to appropriations from agriculture. It has an appropriation.
Without objection, House Bill 188 is re-referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. Okay, now we are at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move House bills for third reading and final consent. I move House bills number 30, 35, 57, 149, and 161.
Would anybody like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Will the reading clerk read the bills on the consent list?
House Bill 30, sponsored by Education, Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Program amendments, an act relating to the Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship Program being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 35, sponsored by Representative Heiner, daycare certification requirement amendments, an act relating to child care facilities being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 57, sponsored by Representative Brown, Armed Forces Amendments, an act relating to defense forces and affairs being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 149, sponsored by Representative Zawanit Serdan, protection of healthcare workers, an act relating to crimes and offenses being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 161, sponsored by Representative Jennings, loan disclosures for guarantors and cosigners, an act relating to banking being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the House? The chief clerk, please call the roll.
Elleman. Allred. Andrew. Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron. Chadwick. Chestick. Clausen. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hornock. Jennings. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup. Oakley. Obermueller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer. Strock. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin. Zwanitzer Dan. Zwanitzer Dave. Speaker Summers.
Aye.
On the consent list, are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for House Bill 30, are there any changes? Davis, aye to no. Hornock, aye to no. Singh, aye to no. Ottman, aye to no. Penn, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Smith,
Quiet.
aye to no. Haroldson, aye to no. Ward, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Strock, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Rodriguez Williams, aye to no. Angelos, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Allemand, aye to no. Tarver, aye to no. Banks, aye to no. Pendergraft, aye to no. Locke, aye to no. Nyman, aye to no. Brown, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 37 aye, 25 no. As for House Bill 35, are there any changes? Yin, aye to no. Northrop, aye to no. Provenza, aye to no. Chestick, aye to no. Sherwood, aye to no. Storer, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes. Closing vote? Vote closed. 56 aye, 6 no. As for House Bill 57, are there any changes? Jennings, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes. Closing vote? Vote closed. 61 aye, 1 no. As for House Bill 149, are there any changes? Davis, aye to no. Hornock, aye to no. Singh, aye to no. Ottman, aye to no. Penn, aye to no. Andrew, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Strzok, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Haroldson, aye to no. Angelos, aye to no. Rodriguez Williams, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Tarver, aye to no. Burkhart, aye to no. Allemand, aye to no. Olson, aye to no. Larson Lloyd, aye to no. Crago, aye to no. Banks, aye to no. Washut, aye to no. Locke, aye to no. Pendergraft, aye to no. Western, aye to no. Nicholas, aye to no. Trujillo, aye to no. Provenza, aye to no. Walters, aye to no. Nyman, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes. Closing vote? Vote closed. 28 aye, 34 no. As for House Bill 161, are there any changes? Brown, aye to no. Walters, aye to no. Northrop, aye to no. Oakley, aye to no. Zwanitzer Dan, aye to no. Zwanitzer Dave, aye to no. Newsom, aye to no. Nicholas, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes. Closing vote? Vote closed. 54 aye, 8 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bills number 30, 35, 57, and 161 have passed the House. Having not received the affirmative vote of majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 149 has failed to pass the House. Let's see. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House resolve itself into committee of the whole to consider only the budget bill, House Bill number 1.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Representative Olson, I think. Is that right? That's what I got on my sheet. Representative Olson!
Do it. What? Lay it on. Stomp a mud hole in it and then walk it dry.
Okay. All right, the committee of the whole will come to order. Privilege of the floor, Representative O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick privilege. We have another birthday today, so everybody gets to stand back up and sing to Andrew Bryant, Representative Byron's birthday today.
All right. As appropriations making their way to their respective new places of abode. The next section for our consideration is Section 205, Education, School Finance. And that should be Representative Zwanitzer. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the body, we are back on the budget bill, so if you want to pull out your summary sheets and your budget bill, I move for explanation, Section 205, Education, School Finance. It should be located on page 17, that's 17 of your summary sheet, and page 81 of your budget bill. Okay, in Governor's Letter 19, the governor asked for an annual increase in the ECA for the 2 fiscal years of 2022 through 2024. And JAC agreed with the first year, but they did not believe the increase of $70,400,000 was necessary in full in the second year, which is only for the year 2023-2024. And that was because of 2 components out of the 4 components. So as you might remember, the 4 components of the ECA are professional labor, non-professional labor, education materials, and energy. And so the JAC and the governor agreed on 2 of the components, that being professional labor and non-professional labor. But on the other 2 components of educational materials and energy, JAC did not agree with the governor's recommendation for the year 23-24 and reduced the amount by the numbers listed on the summary sheet and note 1 from the governor's recommendation. Also, JAC also limited the internal cost adjustment to only the year 2023, and the governor's recommendation suggested ongoing funding. So members of the body, remember that this is from the Joint Appropriations Committee, and there was quite a discussion, and we might suggest that this side may have not agreed based on some of the testimony with what the other side may have. So there's no doubt in my mind that you'll see some amendments headed this way, addressing this issue. And with that, I would stand for any questions that I might be able to answer.
Representative Chairman or Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification. For these ECAs, are districts required to actually make sure that this is going to the teachers, or can they say, we'll give 80% to teachers and we're going to divert 20% away to something else? Or what exactly are the sideboards on those ECAs, if you wouldn't mind maybe elaborating? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of curiosity, kind of along the same guide rails here, but more along the discussion that actually occurred during JAC. What was the reasoning or the rationale for educational materials and the other component that was not brought into that we don't want to see those increased? Just out of curiosity, I'd like to know what maybe some of that background was. While I respect our House appropriations may have not been in the same with the others, I would like to know what that discussion looked like.
Representative Larson, Lloyd.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. In going back to these conversations, this was in December, in our December's meeting. And it was noted in the request that there was an increase in energy and education material inflation. We questioned that and reached out to the utilities providing, because, well, let me back up and say, when we asked the consultant, we found out that that was a broad national inflation on that. So we reached out to the utilities within the state of Wyoming, and they said during that time frame they had only seen about a 4% inflation increase on that. Now, with that said, from December to January, adjusted numbers we've seen at natural gas at $10 an MCF, we have seen that spike in energy inflation up by about that much. So our JAC position was based on those numbers in the fall, and there's certainly evidence to suggest that those inflation numbers were more valid now than they were then.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I go in here on page 82, and I think it's, 82, it stipulates the percentages that will be given out to each one of these things. There's a percentage for professional labor, a different percentage for non-professional labor. There's educational materials that had its percentage, and energy had another percentage. But if you add all those up, it's not even quite 25% of this ECA. So a little clarification what the other 75% of the ECA would go towards.
Representative Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'll notice that those two numbers that do have the same percentages are the fact that we agreed with the first year, 22-23, and we also agreed with the second year of 23-24. Where you see the different numbers are the ones that we disagreed with. So those numbers are different. I hope that explains it. And part of the discussion also that we heard on the energy end of things is that they were basing their cost adjustments on home heating oil. And at that time, home heating oil, I guess, was going up on the eastern part of our country, but it didn't affect here in Wyoming that much. And so that's one of the considerations our JAC took into consideration.
Speaker Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to answer the question of the good representative from the district south of me, those percentages are applied to specific different categories within the funding model. And if you want that, we can get a breakdown of which percentage applies to which components of the funding model. So it's, you remember all those different components, then they divvy out and they are adjusted based upon those. And if you'd like that, I think I could certainly get that for you. Thank you.
Chairman Brown?
Thank you. Just one last question on the ECAs, if I could, Mr. Chairman, and that is, if I can get some background on the last time that we had an ECA that was granted and sustained, as opposed to one time, that would be helpful. So I can kind of gather myself around the understanding of why we didn't sustain it this time. It is a portion of the current litigation that's going on with this body right now, is that we have not held up our end of the ECA, the external cost adjustment, the stuff that sees inflationary adjustments. So I'd like to know when the last time we saw an ECA that was fully sustained and continued on, and then when the last time we had an ECA that was just implemented and dropped off again, just like this, if I could. That would help me. Thank you.
Representative Zwanitzer, Dave? Nope. Representatives, okay. You want it, Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to the question of when the last time it was sustained, actually last year it was sustained for the utilities and the instructional materials. The overall, if you took all four components, the last time all of them collectively was probably 10 years ago, or 2020 is when that was done overall. But over the history in the last 10 or 15 years, some years we've done just components sustained, and sometimes we've done all of it. And so it's been a variety throughout the years as we've looked at that.
Any additional questions on section 205? If not, we will close section 205 and move to section 206, Department of Education. Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is section 206, Department of Education, found on page 17 of your summary sheet and pages 83 through 86 of your budget bill. These actions you heard yesterday, they're reflected in other agencies. Note 1 is in the governor's office, where we moved those dues for the National Education Commission. We moved that over to the Department of Education, thinking that that might be a better fit because of the name. In visiting with the executive branch, the chief executive appoints the members to this, and you'll see an amendment in second reading to move this 26,000 back into the governor's, the governor's office. Note 2 is reflective of an action we took in the Department of Family Services, where we moved funding that was supplemental to the St. Stephen's Indian School over to the Department of Family Services to provide child protective services to the tribal departments of family services, and that completes that action. And then we further note in footnote 6 that the Department of Education would not see that funding in their standard budget, and if things changed moving forward, they could make that supplemental request. One point on that movement of those funds from St. Stephen's to tribal DFSs that I failed to make yesterday is, before doing that, we reached out to both tribes and made sure that they were on board and supported that. Did not hear back from the Eastern Shoshone tribe. The Northern Arapaho tribe did reach back out. We had conversation and supported this effort. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would answer any questions.
Committee, any questions? Over here, Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just like some more information, more information about that St. Stephen's Indian School. Is that a school that's completely under the authority of the state of Wyoming? And if not, how do we justify allocating funds to it. And is that the school that had the problems earlier last year? Just on a little background on how we get intertwined with educational entity, because I understand the Constitution requires that education funding go to those facilities that are under the direct control of the state of Wyoming. Thank you.
Representative Larson Lloyd.
The good chairman from Judiciary is correct in his summary of the structure of a Bureau of Indian Education school. It is not a state of Wyoming school. There were two Attorney General opinions back in a couple of 3 governors ago when there was consideration supplementing their funding that said it to the good chairman's point, that constitutionally prohibited a direct appropriation to that school. If you go in and look at the Department of at our education statutes in there, that is why the funding was granted to the Department of Education. And then the statute says that the Department of Education can appropriate funds to either one of the tribes to help on shortfalls or high needs education needs within the geographic boundaries of the reservation. And in that contract, they designated those funds to go to St. Stephen's to supplement the deficiency. That's how the funding model worked. In this action, that's moved out of there, and the statute's still in place. The statute's still in place, but we've removed those funds. And as I pointed out yesterday, as when this took place and the tribes are no longer in an administrative position with the school, it's solely administered by the BIE. And so we've made numerous attempts to reach out to them, have this conversation, had some questions to your point on that, and without any response from the BIE, those funds remained unused, and so we moved them from there over to providing child protective services with their departments of family services.
All right. Seeing no one making their way to the mic, I will close Agency 206, Department of Education, and we will open Agency 0 through 8, Wyoming Gaming Commission. Representatives Wanitz or Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, body, remember that we go through all the state agencies and then we go through the judicial, and now we are on boards and commissions, of which I believe I have one of the 2 commissions that we'll be talking about. So, Mr. Chairman, I move for explanation, Section 38, the Wyoming Gaming Commission, formerly known as a parimutuel commission. It is found on page 18 of your summary sheet or page 86 of your budget bill. And this commission, please remember, is relatively new. We've had a couple 3 enrolled acts passed in the last couple of years, House Enrolled Act 81 and House Enrolled Act 95, and then in 2021 had Senate Enrolled Act 44. So the commission is addressing a lot of needs because they have a lot of increased revenues coming in, and of course their oversight has broadened. So on page 18 of your spreadsheet, the JAC adopted the governor's recommendation to add $75,132 for 1 full-time position licensed clerk. JAC also adopted the governor's recommendation, which is on 2 different lines, of $101,089 for 2 full-time senior inspector positions for the off-track wagering. And these positions oversee 32 off-track wagering locations and an estimated 1,400 skill game amusement game locations. And that game locations has increased 46% over the last year. On the next one, JAC denied the governor's recommendation to add $104,955 for a full-time equivalent sworn peace officer. And based on denying that sworn peace officer's position, JAC decreased the governor's recommendation for computer equipment from $6,200 to $4,650, and decreased the recommendation for the ETS IT services from $10,000 to $690, or from $10,693 to $8,020. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I would stand for any questions.
All right, Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the denial of the peace officer position and wondering what the rationale was for that. We have asked the Gaming Commission to increase their duties significantly over my time here in the last 4 or 5 years. And it seems that having an additional peace officer would behoove us, as we know that gambling is kind of fraught with criminal activity possibly, and that we would want to have that sworn peace officer in place. Thank you.
Representative Zwanitzer, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the good question. So our understanding is that currently they have 3 peace officers on staff. And those 3 peace officers are also filling in to cover for the 2 new positions that we offered for the off-track wagering. So our feeling was when we add 2 new positions for the off-track wagering, which the peace officers were kind of covering in their spare time, that their need for another one was diminished.
A follow-up, Chairman Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to me that we've had a large increase in the number of OTB sites throughout the state, and that having an additional staff member would not be the worst thing we could do to support the Gaming Commission at this time. Thank you.
Representative Zwanitzer, Dave.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that. So when they were specifically talking about the peace officer, it was a little hard to understand, but I believe the testimony was that they're getting tons and tons of complaints that they're just filing up. And so we basically asked, do you really need a full-time police officer at this wage to go through all that paperwork? And then if they go through the paperwork and find criminal activity, then they would need somebody to testify. But at this point, and with all that's going on and all the newness of their agency, or their commission, excuse me, it sounded like what they needed was just somebody in the back office sorting through and making stacks. And so that's the other reason that we denied that request.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, along those lines, I too have the question about why the sworn peace officer, because his duties would encompass many things other than the positions that you granted, which are licensing and things like that. This man would be out there taking the data, the complaints, i.e., sorting through them and building the cases on, okay? Right now, there's a tremendous push from the other office here in the building on cybersecurity. This has been a huge issue with online gaming and OTBs and the upcoming games of skill. Now that is being, the rules are in the other office of this right now, looking for the signature there. So all these things together warrant this position. Thank you.
Further discussion on this section, or questions rather? Seeing no additional questions, I will close Agency 38, Wyoming Gaming Commission, and I will open Agency 78, Mental Health Professionals Board. Representative Minority Caucus Chairman Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Section 78. This is the Mental Health Professions Licensing Board. This is found on page 18 of your summary sheet and page 87 of your budget bill. The Mental Health Professions Licensing Board regulates the practice of addiction therapists, professional counselors, social workers, marriage and family therapists. It conducts investigations into complaints and holds administrative hearings if disciplinary matters occur. It establishes a license fee and promulgates rules to oversee these professions in our state. The board operations are 100% supported by fees established and collected and does not rely on general funds. As this is a licensing board found in our statutes, the agency receives administrative support from ANI. So you can note that we adopted all of the governor's recommendations for this agency. Under program administration on your summary sheet, you'll see notes 1, 2, and 3 that reflect the increase in fees to cover the agency's administrative costs. These requests for spending authority appear on line 4, page 87 of your budget bill. They consist of almost $40,000 in application fees collected to cover the increase in administrative costs of issuing and renewing licenses. Note 2 is an increase in spending authority for background checks conducted by the Wyoming Department of Criminal Investigation, or DCI, as required by statute. And note 3 is spending authority for a contract with the federally maintained government National Practitioners Database, which allows the agency to ascertain in real time if an applicant has been disciplined in another state. So this is a total request of $161,698 of spending authority based on fees. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Questions? Seeing none, I will close Agency 78 Mental Health Professionals Board, and do want to make an announcement, Committee of the Whole, folks, pursuant to Joint Rule 14-1, subsection N, Romanet 2, all second reading amendments on the budget bill are due to LSO by 5 p.m. today. 5 p.m. today, your amendments are due, and the amendment must be approved 2 hours prior to your convening time tomorrow, which if we convene at 10 a.m., that means 8 a.m. So due today by 5 p.m. and final approval by tomorrow at 8 a.m. With that, I will open section 300. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start on page 88 of the budget bill with section 300. And the first section in section, in the section 300s is section 300. And these are the budget balancers and transfers. And so we'll start on line 5 of page 88 with subsection D. And this is a transfer of $40 million from the LSRA, or from the general fund to the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Endowment Fund. And this is based on Chief Executive's letter number 12. In that letter, he requests we make this transfer. He did make it slightly different in that he recommended $35 million with a $5 million match to get to the $40 million. And the committee felt that a lot of those matching dollars would be requested of the same industries that created the general fund revenue in the first place. And so that is why we chose to go with just a direct appropriation of $40 million to the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Endowment Fund. Moving on to line 12, subsection E. This is $86.4 million from the School Foundation Program Reserve Account to the School Capital Construction Account. And so we'll transfer it here, and then you'll notice as we get to subsection or section 313 on pages 93 through 96 is where these dollars are actually appropriated. So right now, we're just making the transfer from the SFP Reserve Account to the School Capital Construction Account. That's subsection E. Moving on to subsection P, and really subsections P, Q, R, S, and T all are going to have the same general theme to them. So line 18, subsection P, we're transferring $274.7 million from the LSRA to the PMTF Reserve Account. In subsection Q, and then in subsection Q and subsection R at the top of page 89 are tied together. So in subsection Q, we move $112.6 million from the LSRA to the Common School Reserve Account. And then in subsection R at the top of page 89, we intercept the revenues that would normally go to the SFP and put these into the Common School Reserve Account, just as we did before. With the goal here in the total, we end up with $359.1 million going to the Common School Reserve Account. And this, and I'll get to what, and it gets us to that 5 times the spending policy, just as the one in subsection P gets us to the 5 times the spending policy for the general fund side. This does that for the school account. Then we move to subsection S, line 8 of page 89. This is the LSRA to the Hathaway Scholarship Reserve Account. Again, it gets that reserve account to the 5 times the spending policy. And then if we move down to line 13 on page 89, subsection T, it is the LSRA to the Excellence in Higher Education Reserve Account. So all four of those, the purpose of those is to get those reserve accounts, as I said, to 5 times the spending policy. And then, once we can have those reserve accounts at that level, it allows the individual that manages our money to be able to invest all of these portfolios from a total return perspective and generate more revenue for the state of Wyoming. So the goal is to get the Wyoming dollars working harder for Wyoming people. And so that's the goal of all of P, Q, R, S, and T. Now we move down to line 18 on page 89, and we'll begin with subsection U. And subsection U, W, Y, and Z, which are onto the top of the next page, all prevent the tipping until the end of the biennium. So currently we have a spending policy of 5% of the 5-year rolling average, and then once with a reserve account cap of 150% of that spending policy. So once we hit that 150%, then those accounts automatically tip from the reserve account to the corpus of each of those accounts. What this is doing, since this is a supplemental budget, is instead of allowing the tip to occur to the corpus at the end of this fiscal year, we simply change it to allow the tip to occur at the end of the biennium. So that is all the prevention of this tipping does, is prevent it from going at the end of the fiscal year to the end of the biennium. And that's, so I will take a break right there before I finish section 300 to see if there's any questions on this part, and then we'll get to the last 2 subsections.
Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is what's the purpose of preventing the tip? Why are we doing that?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great question. So why do we want to prevent the tip in all of these situations? With the action and the deposits from P, Q, R, S, and T, we will put these reserve accounts over their maxes to where they would automatically move that money to the corpus. And so then that would go against the whole purpose of getting these reserve accounts to that 5 times the spending policy that then allows our chief investment officer for the state to invest all of these dollars, for a greater return in a total rate of return investment policy. Currently, for example, the education accounts are invested strictly for income, which means they are invested at a lower overall rate of return because they need the income on an annual basis. If we have a larger reserve account, then we're able to invest those for a higher rate of return because the reserve account can carry on our cash flow needs throughout the year, and that way we can adjust that, or the chief investment officer can adjust that spending policy to where we end up getting more money. And so, as I said, the goal here is to get hardworking Wyoming dollars working even harder for the good people of the state of Wyoming. And so, as I said, if the reserve account tips are prevented, we need to prevent that now. Otherwise, we would automatically be sending money to the corpuses based on the deposits that are discussed earlier in that section.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on that, and thank you for your explanation, but when we look at 5 times the amount of the spending policy to go into that corpus, then to supply with the earnings, that is a policy thing, and I was wondering if that was put in by the Treasurer's Department or who. And also I was wondering, it seems as our investments are doing very well. If it goes to the point where in a year they aren't so good, will we have enough to keep funding that, or are we going to come back to the general fund for more money? I was just wondering. Thank you.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our investments are doing adequate. We can allow our investments to do far better with the same amount of risk if we can move to this total rate of return concept. The 150% cap is set in our green books. We are not changing that in this action in section 300. We are simply in this action not allowing the tip at the end of the fiscal year, moving it to the end of the biennium. So there is no green book change. We are not changing the overall spending policy 5% of the 5-year rolling average and the 150% of that. So that is not changing here. We are just simply preventing the tip from occurring at the fiscal year change to the end of the biennium. And I shouldn't even say anecdotally, from the chief investment folks' office, by not using this total rate of return attitude and guidance, it has cost the state over $1 billion in the last 5 years. Because had we used the total rate of return philosophy, we would have been able to, as I said, invest differently to where we generated more income with the same amount of risk as we have today. And that is the whole purpose of this. How do we make these dollars work harder for us without taking any more risk? And so that's what would have occurred. So while yes, the investments have done fine, they could have done better for Wyoming had we had these reserve accounts at a higher rate, which would again allow that total rate of return policy to be implemented. So that's bottom of page 89, subsection U is for the PMTF, the Permanent Mineral Wyoming Trust Fund. Subsection W is for the Common School Reserve Accounts. Subsection Y at the top of page 90 is for the Hathaway Student Account, again, preventing the tip. And subsection Z is for the Excellence in Higher Education. They all do the same thing, so just point out which ones do what. Now, if we move on to page 90, lines 11 and 12, Romanette's AA. So there is a bill currently working itself through our body, House Bill 89. If that House bill is enacted into law, then all of the actions P through Z will not take place. And so this just allows to make sure we can implement this. And then as we move on to lines 14 through 16, Romanette's BB, and this is a general fund transfer to the school capital square account. And then just as we did earlier on the school side, we make the transfer in this action in section 300, and then the actual appropriation and the expenditure will occur on pages 105 and 106 that we'll discuss here in just a minute. So with that, are there any further questions on section 300 itself?
Questions on section 300?
Thank you, friends.
Yep, seeing none, I will close section 300 and we will open section 308. Representative Larson, Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're now on section 300. You'll find that on page 20, last page of the summary sheet, and page 90 and 91 of the bill. For those of you that are new, major maintenance of our state assets is an important function that we oversee as state government here in the legislature. We provide funding for major maintenance based on the replacement value of an asset. So if you've got a state office building, the Capitol, you base the major maintenance number that we appropriate on the replacement value. And historically, we've tried to fund major maintenance at about 2.56%, which is what the governor recommended in his standard budget last year. We hesitantly last year reduced that down to 2%, which was a $145 million appropriation for the biennium. Our agencies tasked with this responsibility have been challenged this year to keep up with major maintenance because of the escalated labor prices, professional fees, material shortages, and inflation. The governor made a request to increase this major maintenance appropriation by $17.4 million. In our conversation during the JAC hearings, we reduced that number by half. So section 308 appropriates an additional $8.7 million of this additional funding, which if you've done recalculated that brings our funding up to from 2% to 2.125% approximately. And it's still significantly lower than last year's 2.56 request. So, Mr. Chairman, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and address them.
Questions on section 308? Seeing none, we'll close section 308 and move to section 309. Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 309, also found on page 20 of the summary sheet, is on page 92 of the bill. Last year, when we put together the standard budget, the Department of Health because of enhanced Medicaid rates, that 6.5% we talked about last year, that freed up a significant number of general funds that we knew would be reverted. And so last year, to address some of the short funding or the cuts that we had made in previous years in Department of Health agencies, we allowed them to use up to $80 million of those anticipated reversions to help fund back the DD waiver cuts and some of the other cuts that we've had in place. What we do in Section 309 is we add to that list for which the reversions can be used for to help take care of some needs that we have at the Department of Health's public lab. This allows them to use some of those unobligated carryovers to replace outdated equipment and to address some ongoing concerns that exist that are to ensure the integrity of a BSL-3 lab and that remains intact for licensure. The most acute equipment need, of course, that they indicated to me were new autoclaves that disinfect and sterilize potential contaminated waste, and then equipment for the chemical testing program. The new instrumentation that they would like to get put into place will provide cost savings of $115 to $140 per sample. This goes to the Department of Corrections, counties and city prosecutors, and the Defense Council, and it reduces the turnaround time from what is currently 20 to 40 days to an improvement of 5 to 15 days. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd answer any questions on that request.
Questions on Section 309? Seeing none, we will close Section 309 and we will open Section 310. Speaker Pro Tem Stith.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members, Section 310, I think is best explained by looking at the long form of your budget bill. I think it's easier to understand looking at that. On page 92, you'll notice the title of it, line 15, it says Limitation on Salary Increase. So Section 310, as we passed it last year, is really good because what it does is it tells the agencies that when they're preparing their budgets next time for the 25-26 biennium, that we don't want them to artificially put employee compensation increases into their Series 100. We want them to keep it just level so that they can't put any more money into Section 100 other than what was in this prior biennium, plus including any compensation increases that are approved in this budget. So that's basically what 310 does. It works really well in connection with 307, not shown. 307, as you may remember, again, we did it last year, it's the one that tells the agencies, hey, don't play games between Section 1, Series 100 payroll and Series 900 contract services. We want to know that the money that we appropriate for payroll goes to payroll, the money we appropriate for contract services goes to contract services. So against that background, you may want to ask, well, why would we change Section 310? Because if you look over onto the top of page 93, you'll see that we are adding a change. And the question is, well, why would we add a change for $8 million? And it's this. You remember last year, we approved $65 million for employee compensation increases. That was on average 6.2% across the enterprise. The compensation system, quite appropriately, instead of just giving everyone a 6.2% raise, what it does is it says we're going to give a base level compensation increase of 3%, and then there's a merit component, right? And that makes sense because when you're managing human resources, you want to be able to reward employees based on merit if you can. Well, an effect of that is that for vacancies, and there have been a lot of vacancies, our vacancy rates about of our 7,000 and some positions we have in the state government, we've got nearly 1,400 vacancies. So that's a lot of vacancies. Well, you can't give a merit-based pay increase to someone who's not there. So as a result of our actions last year, the employees who physically showed up to work, the filled positions, They got both the base plus a merit-based compensation, but the vacancies didn't. One thing the Appropriations Committee insisted upon, and that shows up on this section D of section 310, is that we want to make sure that the vacancies are leveled up as much as we can get them to be, because we want the job postings to be accepted. We don't want this high vacancy rate. Some agencies have very high vacancy rate. It's in Department of Corrections, approaching 30%. It's very in certain locations. We don't want that, so we want to level up the vacancies. And so what this does is it says, look, as the agencies through this year, they're not using the payroll funds for vacancies. They've got it appropriated, but they don't have to spend it. So that money is sort of left over, so to speak. What this section does is allows them to use up to $8 million of vacancy savings to level up the vacancy postings effective July 1 of 2023. We will talk again in more detail about employee compensation in connection with Section 329. That's where we'll get into the exact dollars for the employee compensation increases. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions on Section 310? Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to ask for a little clarification, that you used the words level up, and I'm not sure I follow what you're talking about with leveling up.
Speaker Pro Tem Stith.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Washit, that's a great question, and it's worth going through this deliberately and carefully. If you'll notice on page 93, the last line 7 and 8, it says they can use this $8 million starting on line 6 only if the budgeted amount for all vacant positions funded with general funds is at least 90% of the market policy position for 2022. So what this says is that the vacancies will brought up to what we think of as 90% of market. And you may, in this market policy position, frankly, is a very sort of a weird phrase. What does that mean? And the way it's calculated is that we have the agency that deals with this issue for administration and provides us with information, looks at the states where people from Wyoming are most likely to migrate to. So for example, in order, and I can just say the states, it's Colorado, Utah, Texas, Montana, Idaho, and so on. And so what they do is they look at if a state employee working here in our capital city might be tempted to take a job just to the south of us. So they're likely to migrate out. So that state to the south of us is a good market comparator because we want to, so the market policy position is to say, when you look at this basket of states that people from Wyoming are more likely to migrate out to, what do those state employees get paid? And so you're trying to get an apples to apples comparison to the extent we can. Please note, we're not, in this market policy position, we're not using states like New York or Massachusetts or Hawaii, for example. We're using states that are either continuous or states that have been associated historically with out-migration. So that's what market policy position is. And getting the vacancies to 90% of market, that of course is not 100%. I mean, you could say, well, why don't we make it 100%? I think the feeling there is we do want a merit-based component of our compensation. So you bring them in at 90, they show they're good employees, they get pay increases thereafter. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I'm pretty new at this, but I'm confused. If we're down vacancy-wise throughout the state on employees, correct? The budget was already created based on those positions, correct? So where is the money that should be in that account sitting, and is it eligible to do this? I would say what you're talking about is an incentive to keep those employees here. So you would need more money to keep the employees, but yet you have money sitting there that is not being used because we don't have employees. So I'm a little bit confused.
Speaker Pro Tem Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, great question. So the $65 million that the legislature appropriated last year was used primarily for retention, to keep our existing employees. As a result, the vacancies weren't leveled up, weren't funded to the same extent as the filled positions. And I think the other heart of your question is, well, what's happening to the money, right? Essentially, it's estimated to be quite substantial. The estimate is that there may be as much as $61 million for this fiscal year from July 1 of 2022 to June 30th of 2023, $61 million that will be of unused payroll. And without this subsection D, all of that would revert to the general fund. Under this subsection, up to that amount less $8 million. So they're allowed to use $8 million of the unused funds to level up the vacant positions to 90% of market.
Any further questions on section 310? Okay, we will close section 310 and open section 311. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Section 311 is our concurrence with the governor's biennial budget development. So on footnote number 7 of your summary sheet, page 93, lines 16 and 22 in the budget bill, documents our concurrence with the governor's one-time funding or sustained funding, biennialized, or recommendation for reductions in the supplemental budget request unless specifically documented differently within the bill. So this concurrence keeps the standard budget lower than it would normally be, and this is seen on lines 20 and 23 on page 93, by not allowing agencies to include one-time funding requests in their standard budget requests. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Seeing no questions on section 311, we will close it and open section 313. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 313 begins on the bottom end of page 93, but it really, for the title, but the real crux of it starts on page 94 and runs through page 96, yes. And so what this does, Mr. Chairman, on page 94, lines 14 through 20, we saw this $20 million in the Agency 027 State Construction Department. That's where the money was allocated. Now the money gets expended in this section. So it's not a doubling of the funds. It is just simply one place it's allocated, the next place is where it's expended. So in that section, this is $20 million. It's down from, as we discussed in 027, down from a little over $21 million. And that was just a change due to when the chief executive submitted his budget to when the committee finished its work and we had a better, more refined number. So that $20 million is for inflation. And if we go to line 22 in subsection A, this is for component level projects that we approved that year. Then if we go to the top of page 95, subsection B, lines 1 through 3, again, this is component level projects, but it was another year. Then we go to subsection C, page 95, lines 5 through 7. This is for demolition projects that were approved in a previous construction budget, or previous budget, excuse me. And then lines 9 through 11, subsection D, this is for actual new construction that was approved last year. And that new construction is taking place on a elementary school in the county that includes the Razor City, not in the Razor City itself, an auditorium in the center part of the state, and a full K through 12 school up in the Bighorn Basin. And so that is what those projects and the dollars for those projects were already appropriated. And this is the agency used a 30% inflation factor on this. And why did they pick that number? Because they've bid a couple projects over the last year, and that's what they saw as those bids came in over budget, or not over budget, but over estimates, was at 30% in inflation. So that's how that $20 million total was derived, and then it's allocated out in those 4 different subsections. So before we move on to the next part of it, if someone has a question on that first half, I'd gladly take it, or we can do the whole thing at once, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, a question on the construction inflation portion. So I'm wondering how many of these projects I mean, we budgeted for this and they're sort of already in the works. Did we miss the budget by that much? Typically when if these projects are already ongoing, the budget's established. So I guess I'm just wondering with the chicken and egg concept, when these projects were begun, you know, inflation has been expensive. 30% seems kind of outrageous to miss the bid by that much on what we budgeted initially. Thanks.
Representative Walters?
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to answer that. So some of these projects that were actually approved 3 and 4 years ago, and they were estimated through very good engineering design estimations at that point in time. And so, some of them were in the 2016 session that were later modified by the 2017 session. And then some of them were last year's projects. We appropriated the money last year based on what the expected budget would be. And now that we have gone out, but we had not signed any contracts to do these projects. We simply, the legislature okayed the districts to go ahead and move forward with the projects. And then they went out and some of them have it and had to finish their design work, had to finish some of their permitting work. And by the time they get through that process, they have experienced that kind of inflation. And the department does have good experience on noting that that is what they believe the inflation to be, as they have actually bid and signed contracts in the intervening period and seen the inflation at those kind of numbers. So some of these have not gone out to bid yet, but it's an assumed that's going to go up, and so that they can continue to move these projects forward, they need to get the money in place and not cost time and money going forward.
Representative Davis?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I heard you correctly, you said that you listed a few projects that had already had inflation adjustments earlier in, so if I'm following you right, you're basing your assumption on inflation that you've already assumed once in each one of these projects going forward. Is that correct?
Representative Walters?
Mr. Chairman, no, none of these projects have any inflation in them prior to the action that we are presenting to you today. The action that has taken place is other projects not listed in this bill in the intervening period have gone to bid and bids have came in, component level as well as full construction, to where the department has good experience in seeing what was estimated and what they are seeing in the actual bids. Those projects had enough money in them because, for example, here in this county last year, we appropriated an additional $6 million to an elementary school that was being constructed here for this very purpose. And as those projects, as they finalized their bidding, signed the contract to do that work, they saw what the original estimate was from a year and a half prior to that, when the design took place, to what the actual bid environment was. Additionally, the department goes out and looks at what are the bid environments and bid climate on other projects that are not state related and how are those taking place. This is the number that they come up with when they go out and ask the contractors and ask others in the industry, what is happening here? The projects discussed here have not had any inflation money added to them other than what's being discussed here. As I said, the bid experience is on other projects not listed here.
Representative Davis?
Mr. Chairman, a follow-up. On your 30%, dealing with, in my particular instance, we deal with with the state of Wyoming, and all the contracts that we deal with the state of Wyoming are tied to the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which, could you tell me what that is and how this compares to that?
Representative Walters?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know an answer to that because that's a different part of the state government that must use that. That is not used in coming up with these numbers and is not, historically has not been used in these calculations. Okay, so I think we've wrapped up the questions on that part of it. Now we are on page 95, moving on to subsection 14. It starts on line 13, and we'll move down the page. So what we've done here is what I would describe as we front load the School Facilities Commission with $100 million going forward for projects in the next year. Of that $100 million, we specify that 33 million, or not exceeding 33 million, will be used for a grade 5-6 elementary school here in this county, as well as not exceeding 22 million will be used for renovation and addition, which is needed to resolve a capacity issue in the county that has the large mountains in it. And then we move on down to the subsection C, which is on, starts on line 24 and moves on to the top of page 25, and we appropriate $45 million that will be utilized for projects related to capacity and condition statewide, and those projects will be determined as determined by the commission based on the capacity and condition assessment that will be coming out about midsummer this year. And then it also indicates that those projects will have to go through the commission. The commission will help with the further planning of those projects, or they may be able to utilize existing district designs and planning if that's how the commission chooses to proceed. So again, that's a front loading is how I would describe it of the School Facilities Commission of $100 million. And the goal there is we know that inflation is hitting all of these projects. And so how do we get shovels in the ground a little bit quicker? We know we need to spend a couple $100 million a biennium to maintain our assets in this regard. And so this is how we can kind of jumpstart that process. So with that, I'll take questions on any of section 313, but I know we've addressed quite a few of them in the first half of the section, but happy to address them anywhere in the section.
Representative Minority Whip Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How far behind are we on capital construction? How close does this get us to that number? If we are behind on our capital construction, my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, seems like there was a period where we didn't approve some of our capital construction budget, and it ended up increasing the amount of projects that we've had to do in the past. So I'm just curious if that was something I hallucinated, or if that is what happened in previous sessions, and yeah, that amount on how far behind we are, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Walters.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would contend that we're really right on schedule. Our component level type projects, those will change on an annual basis as a 20-year roof comes out, starts to wear out and needs replaced. And so from year to year, we're going to see that as an HVAC system comes to the end of its useful life. That will be an ongoing change from year to year. So we're doing a good job of keeping up with it. Over approximately the last 15 years, we have replaced or renovated about 25% of the school facility asset in the state of Wyoming. And if we look at the school facility asset as having a 60-year life cycle, we're right on track because we've done about 25% in 15 years. Calculate that out, and we're going to hit, if we continue that for the next 45 years, we're right on track of keeping up with our asset, maintaining our asset. Having grown up and lived in Wyoming and lived through the 80s and 90s, I know we didn't spend nearly enough maintaining our school assets, and so we spent a good chunk of money in the early 2000s really trying to catch up because the state was behind the 8 ball in that regard. We've done a great job with that. Obviously, there's more to be done, but we are meeting our needs at this time. I'd add to that also that the school assessment for capacity and condition, that is statutorily required. We are a couple years behind on that, and the reason we're a couple years behind is we used to have an item in there that was also suitability. And the way the calendar was going to work out, we were going to study capacity and condition one year and suitability the next year. And this body said, that doesn't make sense. They're all kind of tied together. Let's do the study all in one year. So we delayed, didn't do the first capacity and condition, and then the following year we eliminated the need for suitability. And so we finally went out and did the capacity and condition study, but it does have us a couple years behind our statutory requirement. We've conducted the study, the reports are being, and every school, every inch of every school and every building has been walked, looked at, discussed with every district, and now the final report is being drafted. And as I said, that should be May, June, July timeframe in there is what they're estimating to get that capacity and condition assessment back to the state of Wyoming for us, for the commission to begin working on those schools. So hopefully that answers the question, but like I said, I think the state has done an admirable job of getting our schools and this asset up to snuff over the last 15 years or so, and hope to continue that great work going forward.
Representative Baer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. We have the study that's coming out in May or June of this year for the facility condition and capacity assessment. I'm just curious how we determined that the school in paragraph A and the school in paragraph B were deemed necessary before we have that study.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So some of those needs are really carryovers from our previous capacity and condition studies that were not addressed adequately at that time. And so it was the opinion of the committee that we should probably try and pick up those last couple items that didn't get addressed, that were really on the high needs side of the previous capacity and condition assessment.
Additional questions on section 313? Seeing none, we will close section 313.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we'll move to section 316. Representatives Wanitz or Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be on page 96 of your budget bill. And of course, we're going to be on the last page of the summary sheet. So it's pretty simple. JAC adopted the governor's rec to allow the department to use any leftover AML funds. And so basically, there's a little over 210,000 left in that account that have been reverted. As you may or may not know, but AML funds was a big thing back in 2015, 2016. And I think we had about $600 million that we could spend through the state. And as some of those projects got finished and there was extra money left over, we're on the tail end of that. So it just allows them to reapply if they need to for a couple $100,000. And I stand for any questions.
All right, seeing no questions on section 316, I will close and open section 321. Chairman Nicholas? 321?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I bring you section 321, ladies and gentlemen. So you may recall in the last year's budget, for those of you folks that were here, we had an ARPA bill, and in that ARPA bill, there were certain funds that were that we could use to address the impacts of the COVID outbreak on the state of Wyoming. We were one of the 4 or 5 states that actually could do it because we had a decrease in our overall a substantial decrease in our GDP. And so one of the things that we did in the budget last year, and you'll see that at the top of page 98, we took $100 million of those ARPA dollars, which were, and we transferred them to the LSRA, and then we allocated those funds to the chief executive's office so that they could go out and assist, or basically find large projects that need states, who are fighting for these large projects. For example, like a small nuclear plant, or a hydrogen hub, or a carbon capture facility. And some of those large type projects that allow the governor to go negotiate with large companies with these dollars to bring those type of businesses to Wyoming. And so what we are doing in 321, we're adding $50 million more to that account based on the governor's request. And so that's line 3. And those are they're considered general funds, but the reason we're using general funds, because the other thing we did as part of ARPA, we took funds from, for example, the Department of the Corrections, Department of Family Services that are federal dollars, and we swapped them out with those ARPA dollars, and so that we were paying for our corrections and for our Department of Family Services with those ARPA dollars, freeing up those general funds that we can use for something else. And so that's how we came up with why this is general funds for this 50 million. So those are essentially swap dollars that we have in the general fund, but they're really ARPA dollars because that's how they got there. So we're increasing that kitty, if you will, for the governor to 150 million. And then if you go down to to line 15, there was a motion to specifically address lithium mining and lithium deposits for a large project so that as part of these funds, the lithium would be addressed. So that didn't come from our side, so you'll probably see an amendment from the House taking out the lithium, because if you go back up, look at line 11, that's already addressed in there as something that can be looked at, but to actually earmark it for lithium, and at these certain locations, the state really didn't make a lot of sense, so we'll have an amendment to that. Then if you go down to line 22, all this is a notice requirement, so when the governor expends these dollars that we made available for him, he has to give us prior notice, because he's in negotiations, and so before he actually allocates those funds, we want to know what that's going to be for and give us enough time to react to it. So it's 30 days before he enters any new agreements with any of these large companies. So happy to answer any questions.
Seeing no questions on section 321, we will close it and we will open section 325. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 325 is our appropriation to match the federal infrastructure grants. This is found on page 99 of the budget bill. We appropriated $5 million of previously appropriated but unobligated funds to be used for construction of an airport tower at an international airport in Wyoming. The use of this appropriation requires a 4-to-1 match from any source of funds. So for every $1 of general funds, 4 other dollars matches that. This is to react to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that will flow through the DOT for Federal Aviation Administration. And similar to the last section, expenditures shall be reported to both Management Council and JAC with the description of the desired action and outcomes at least 30 days before the use of the funds are authorized. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions on section 325? Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question about this airport tower. Is there a specific airport tower that we're funding here, or is this open for multiple towers or any other towers, or this section C there on the airport tower? Just like some clarification.
Representative Sherwood.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So any, as it says here on page 99, a construction of an airport tower at any international airport in Wyoming. I don't have a list of those, but I think we can imagine which of our airports in Wyoming are considered international. And I should say too, if you look at the top of page 99, so previously we had set aside, and currently is set aside $75 million. We are still waiting on federal rules and regulations to be able to use this money for matching. So the nice thing about section C is that this application is open now and we can make movement and use of this money now. Thank you.
Questions on section 325? Closing section 325, open section 327. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you section 327. So I talked a little bit about this in the introduction. So what we discovered in appropriations, and it actually was brought to our attention by our budget office, that in the past, and according to statute, which is, I think it's statute 9-2-1112, but it provides in statute that when we have government encumbrances, so for example, if the Department of Health has some funds that are sent to the Department of Health that are federal dollars to be spent on particular projects or programs within the Department of Health, for accounting purposes, we have been taking that encumbrance and putting it in, taking that encumbrance and applying it to the general fund. So it's a negative balance, or it's a reduction of the overall general fund balances. And because of how we've modified our accounting processes and how we account for federal funding now, what happens is at the end of this biennium, we now know that there'll be $160 million that are basically just simply accounting federal encumbrances that we have reduced from the books that, when in fact, there are federal dollars that are expended and then they come back and they come off the books. So we said this accounting practice doesn't make any sense. And so there's a bill out there, which I believe is Senate File 118, that modifies that accounting practice. And so as we do that, this practice won't continue after the end of the biennium, but we do know that at the end of this biennium, we're going to have essentially a windfall of $160 million for all these quote-unquote encumbrances that we put in our balance sheets. And so the idea of the joint appropriations was, here we have $160 million, what should we do with it? Should we just let it go back to the general fund? Should we expend it? And the idea came up with, well, let's use this for large projects, similar to what I just talked about in section 321, give it to the governor. So if we want to work on some of these large projects, he can use that to help negotiate bringing in these larger projects. Then as I described yesterday, the House position on this is, as you know, here we have $900 million of excess revenue, with none of it going into the permanent corpus. If we use these dollars to go into the permanent corpus, it doesn't change our balance sheets, and it doesn't take the money away, because it's money that's going to flow back in basically on an accounting, on the accounting process. So we're going to bring an amendment Wednesday that modifies this 327 that just deposits these funds directly into our permanent corpus. So we save it and raise the permanent corpus. So that's the explanation of what 327 is and what we plan to do with it tomorrow. So happy to answer questions.
No questions on Representative Hornock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to clarify for me, if Section 327 is enacted and the governor has $160 million to spend, is that on top of the $150 million as part of Section 321, essentially, where we're allowing the governor to kind of go out and find large projects to the tune of $310 million? Thanks.
The answer is, as written today, yes.
Okay, no further questions on section 327. I will close section 327 and open section 328. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I bring for explanation section 328, page 20 on your summary sheet, and page 101 of your budget bill. It's titled Enterprise and Inflation. Mr. Chairman, if you refer to note 13, or JAC adopted the governor's letter number 4 for $20.132 million. Of that, 14.44 of general fund, 3.52 of federal funds, and 2.17 of other funds for increased costs of utilities, travel, food at state facilities, and facility healthcare services due to inflation. Latest analysis, as you know, we have the highest inflation in 40 years. Overall, Wyoming inflation is around 10.1, transportation 16.4, and housing 8.6. This is on your budget request at page 101. If there are no questions, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the explanation of section 328, enterprise inflation.
Questions on section 328? Seeing none, we will close section 328 and open section 329. Representative Speaker Pro Tem Stith.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. So section 329 is employee compensation. First, I'd like to go through just what the numbers are and then talk about why these numbers are this instead of being, well, some other number. So on page, and again, I think it's best to use your long form budget. I think it's easier to understand than the summary sheet. So at the top of page 102, line 2 and 3, there is appropriated $48,850,000. So $48,850,000 from the general fund for salary adjustments of general funded employees and vacant positions. Then, so that's the total number. And then you'll see as you go down the page, this $48.8 million is split into 4 components. And you may say, well, why? And the reason is because, so line 10 on page 102, 28.4 million, that's for the general funded portion of all the state executive branch agencies. Line 19, we have $12.2 million to the University of Wyoming. University of Wyoming employees don't show up on the state payroll system in the same way. That's why they're handled differently. And the same as you'll notice for the lines 25 and 26, $6.5 million for the community colleges. Again, the community colleges don't show up, the community college employees don't show up as state executive branch employees. And finally, on the next page, page 103, we have $1.6 million to the Supreme Court. And that's there because the Supreme Court, being a different branch of government, is not an executive branch state agency. So that's why the money is split up the way it is. The question is, why is it this number at all? You might think, well, we gave them a raise last year, why are we doing it again? There are a couple of answers to that. First off is that after the raise that was given last year, which across the enterprise was an average of 6.2%, we still had 5,591 state employees who were being paid less than 90% of the 2020 market. So basically, and you say, well, how is that possible? And that relates to the history of state employee compensation. If we look back, and again, this is a bit tedious to go through, but I think the history is important here. Going back to 2014, that year, state employees were given a 2.38% increase. 2015, a 2.9% increase. In 2016, state employees were given 0% increase. 2017, 0% increase. 2018, 0% increase. 2019, 2.5%. 2020, 0%. And then last year in 2022, they were given a 7.9% increase. Okay? So there are a couple of different ways of looking at this, but one simple way is you can just get on the internet and go to the inflation calculator. And if you were paid $100, if you were paid $100 in 2013, then in 2023, you would need to be paid $125 to have the same real wages, because inflation's been about that much since 2013. And you can do that calculation yourself or just look on the internet. So we've had about 25% inflation from 2013 to the present, last 10 years. When you add up all these combined wage increases from 2013 and through last year, it's about 16%. This section 329 amounts to an average 8% increase. So when you add that up, essentially, it will, if you made $100 in state employee compensation in 2013, if this is approved, you will be making $125. So essentially, it just keeps the employees leveled up to inflation. So in terms of real wages, if we do this, their real wages will be the same as they were in 2013. That's the kind of a big picture look at it. So that's and from my point of view, that's the easiest way to look at it. what this will do in terms of this market policy position, or MPP, that we talked about earlier, comparing Wyoming to other comparable states that have out-migration. And I think I mentioned Texas as being included as an out-migration state. It is an out-migration state to some extent, but I looked more carefully. It's not included in the model. The model includes, for this market policy, the model includes Colorado, Utah, Montana, Idaho, Arizona, South Dakota, New Mexico, and Washington State. So, having said that, if we do this, if this is approved as written, then compensation for our state employees will be at 98% of 2022 market policy position. So it's a policy choice. We believe that's appropriate to pay our state employees. And also, as you'll notice, the word vacancy shows up again in this section 329, because we want to make sure that the job postings are attractive enough that people will accept the job. And really, how do we know we're not paying our employees enough, right? How do we know? Well, we know because the vacancies are at 1,400 positions, 20% of our state positions are unfilled. And that's how you know we're not paying them enough. When someone walks away from the table and doesn't take the job, that's how you know. So, and I would stand for any questions.
Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just ask the presenter to describe for us the rationale on the, looks like a $12.2 million haircut in general fund, and the JAC changes on the summary sheet. And just whether or not JAC at this point believes that with these adjustments, will we stop the bleeding? Do we have sufficient funds allocated for personnel that will stop the bleeding of public employees from the state of Wyoming? You know, what happens over and over again is about the time we give some of these pay increases, we also increase pension contributions, or we increase insurance costs to the state employees, and the take-home value of that employee's paycheck doesn't change that much, or sometimes actually goes down. So the 12.2 haircut, and then are we comfortable that we've done enough here to address our needs?
You want to take additional questions? Or you want to? Yeah, I think you should. Go ahead, Speaker Pro Tem Stith.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Washit, a great question from the good chairman. I apologize for using the personal name, apologize, from the good representative. The reason that it's $12 million less, because the governor wanted 61 million and we reduced it to 48.85. The reason is because of the start date, because our chief executive had suggested that these pay increases start April 1st of 2023. And we said, we made the judgment call that it's cleaner if the pay increases start at the beginning of the fiscal year on July 1, 2023. And that's the reason for the difference.
Okay, now Majority Floor Leader Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a kind of a clarification, I guess, when the good presenter was talking about what our increases were given last year, that was a 6.2%. But correct me if I'm wrong, but we ended up allowing 7.9% to the employees. And so I guess my question is, how does that happen? And my first thought would be, and I guess my next ask would be, are the increases that are being given to the employees also being added to the open positions? Because can that create a situation where if those dollars are not being added to those positions, thus that's a lower amount being offered? Could that be some of the problem, what we're struggling with by getting these positions open? So if you could just help me understand what's the difference between the 6.2, what was given, and how they ended up with a 7.9. Thank you.
Speaker Pro Tem Stith.
Mr. Chairman, that's an excellent point, and I struggled with this for what seemed like a very long time to finally understand how the numbers all match together. But the majority of floor leaders is absolutely right that the $65 million that we appropriated last year does average out to 6.2% across all positions. But as implemented, the vacancies were funded to a lesser extent. And so the real human beings, the filled positions, they got on average a 7.9% raise. And it is correct to say that the vacant positions are now at a much lower funding, it's like in the 83% of market range right now. And that's one reason why we insisted in the Section 310 that we talked about a moment ago, that these vacant positions at least be brought up to 90% of 2022 market, because we don't want that to happen a second time. We don't want to have all of this new money go to just the filled position and underfund the vacancies. Thank you.
Representative Heiner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talk about giving raises to the Supreme Court, and it says it's distributed to among the employees and vacant positions of the Supreme Court. But in a previous section, we allocated $877,000 for raises for the judges. As I read this, I'm not sure that the judges will be excluded from a raise on top of their raise, which means a 2 times raise. So is it clear in there to everyone else that the judges will not get a raise on top of their pay bump?
Speaker Pro Tem Stith?
Mr. Chairman, a great question. Thank you very much. Because the salaries for judges are statutory, they are not included in this Section 329. So the money going to the Supreme Court is for the employees, that agency, I should say, is the judicial branch, is for the employees of the judicial branch and not the judges.
Minority Floor Leader Yin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a question on the salaries for, okay, so last year I had brought a budget amendment for a group of folks that I thought were dramatically lower on the pay scale than I thought they needed to be. And so I'm curious on we said on average it's up to a certain amount. Do we know that we're gonna stop the bleeding on some of those folks that help us deal with our roads and public safety on them? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of observations here. If we're increasing the colleges that much, is our enrollment up on these colleges? Is one question. And then you've addressed the other question I had about the compensation packages. And then as far as the vacancies, I think this is an issue throughout the state, whether it be state or private. We have this vacancy issue, and I don't know what the answer is to incentivize employees. Thank you.
Speaker Pro Tem Stith?
Mr. Chairman, to take those last 2 questions, it's my understanding that the structure of this is so that the agency directors do have some discretion. I've described these raises as being 8%, but it's not going to be the case that every state agency employee gets an 8% raise. Rather, the state agency directors will be using their discretion to give those raises where they seem appropriate to. So for the entry-level people, there might be slightly higher raises, say in potentially Department of Corrections, where our vacancy rate for entry-level correctional officers is very high. So 33% for entry-level correctional officers right now. So this discussion has mostly been on the average level, but the agency directors are tasked with that. With respect to the community colleges, that's a really interesting question, because the community colleges get on average 55% of their funding from the state. So that means, and the remaining balance of their budget, 45%, comes from local resources. So the effect of this year, and as it was last year, is that the community college employees will be getting less than an average 8% raise. They'll be getting essentially 55% of 8%, whatever that number comes out to be. So that's an issue that I think the community colleges are not necessarily happy about. However, hopefully their assessed valuation on average has gone up, and that their local resources hopefully will also be higher than in the past.
Representative Hornock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So kind of a follow-up on the question that was asked earlier about the judges and salary increases for judges. Statewide elected officials' salaries are also statutorily regulated, but this section does specifically say it includes statewide elected officials. Could you explain who that is other than the 5 statewide elected officials? Thank you.
Speaker Pro Tem Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, to look at the language, again, it's on page 102. I think it's worth reading through this slowly. It starts at line 2 through 8. There is appropriated $48,850,000 from the general fund to the state auditor for salary adjustments of general funded employees and vacant positions whose salary is not prescribed by law for the fiscal period commencing July 1, 2023 and ending June 30th, 2024. So elected officials, their salary is prescribed by state law. So the elected state officials do not get a compensation increase through this section 329.
Representative Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just had a question which may help when we look at how much we're paying our good state employees to know as a body what portion of the increase is market adjustment, what portion of the increase is inflation adjustment, and then what portion would still be left to merit. The concern I have is it's important to get to market rates. I'm a little concerned about chasing inflation and then to have that special component of merit included.
Speaker Pro Tem Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that these calculations were not based upon inflation per se, but rather were designed to get the employees to a certain level of market. And as mentioned, on average, if these are implemented, it would be at 98% of the so-called COMPA ratio, which my understanding is 98% of the market policy position. And again, of 2022 market policy position. Coincidentally, it turns out, just if you do the numbers, and if you just picked 2013 as your base year, coincidentally, it turns out that it brings up the employee compensation to compensate for inflation. That was not the methodology used to get there, but coincidentally, it essentially means that if you made $100 in 2013 as a state employee, you're going to be making in real wages in 2023, you would be making the same $100 in 2013 dollars. Thank you.
Chairman Nicholas.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, the inflation analogy was just that. The pay raises weren't predicated on inflation; they were predicated on market rates. And when they did it, the first thing they did was take up all the lowest positions were on the lowest on that market rate graph. So the ones that were 60, 70% below market. And the ultimate objective was bring it up to the mean or above or near it, that 98 of the mean. So the fact was that over the course of the last 10 years, we have been, the trajectory has been going down across state government. In other words, we weren't keeping up with the market rates or inflation, or either one, but it was all market adjusted.
All right. Seeing no additional questions on section 329, I will close section 329 and we'll move to section 330. Representatives Wanitz or Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are going to be on page 104 of your budget bill. And Mr. Chairman, what JAC did was to reduce the governor's letter number 17 that they asked originally for $789,835, and we reduced it down to an amount of $307,182. And I'll explain a little more of that in just a second. But basically what Section 330 does, it just allows those agencies that are in the Thyra Thompson building up in the center of our state to have the same spending authority with other funds for their facility maintenance and their operations and their security. just like we do for all the other state buildings in the state. So the question is, why did we do such a reduction? And the answer is that the executive office, with their best estimations, came up with that number. So now that the building is up and running and we have a little better understanding of how much of the federal funds are going to be in the state funds, that's why we reduced it down to that 307,000. One other note, the other reason this section's in here, because it's going to allow those agencies that are up there, it'll expedite their ability to receive federal funds. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions on section 330? Seeing none, I will close section 330 and move to section 331. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move for explanation your section 331, State Fair Endowment, which is on page 20 on your summary sheet and page 104 of your bill. Mr. Chairman, referring to note 16 on page 20, your JAC added 500,000 general fund to serve as matching funds for cash gifts received by the Department of Agriculture and deposited into the State Fair Endowment account. The purpose for this, and I'd urge you to look at the top of the page of your budget bill, top of page 105 there, there's a requirement that these matching gifts have to be certified by the Department of Agriculture director and will not be transferred until all of this amount has been certified. And any unused or unobligated funds at the end of the biennium will be reverted back to the general fund. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the explanation of 331.
Questions on section 331? Seeing none, we'll close it and move to section 332. Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 332, found at the bottom of page 20 on your summary sheet, authorizes the appropriation of $1.5 million from the Capitol Square Preservation Account to the Wayfaring Committee as they continue their work on finishing up the work here in the Capitol. As we came back this year, it's fun to go down and into the connector tunnel and see all of the furniture finally being put in place that we've been anticipating for a number of years. And as they finish that up, you were here a Monday or two ago, you've seen them working on acoustics, and this authorizes them to continue that work. Mr. Chairman, I'd answer any questions on that.
Questions on section 332? We'll close section 332 and move to section 390. Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the bottom page of your summary sheet on 390, the JAC denied the governor's letter number 16, where he requested $3 million for a 1% increase to the employer contributions on the retirement. And yet, if you look at your note, it suggests that there is still a JAC bill under consideration. JAC has completed its work and there's no longer a bill there, so there's no action being taken on that, and I'd happy to answer any questions on that.
Questions on section 390? Seeing no questions on section 390, we will close that section and we'll move to our final section, section 4. Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the mineral royalty grants back in section 60, state lands and investment, we made available to the governor. The governor wanted $10 million. We had $6 million there, and then we added $4 million. But the $6 million that we had there, we froze last year in case we needed it in the budget adjusters that the good representative from the center part of the state mentioned in the section 300. So what we do here in section 4 is we repeal that and make those funds available to meet the governor's request for mineral royalty grants through the state land and investment. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd answer any questions we have on that. And Mr. Chairman, I would just suggest that on the very final thing is that the effective date of this is immediately.
Any questions on section 4? Seeing none, we will close section 4. Committee, having heard and considered Representative Chairman Nicholas's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 0001 do pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. House Bill 1 has passed the committee of the whole. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the House stand in recess until 2:15 PM.
No, we need to do this. We need to do the committee to hold, so you go down there and then I.
Oh.
Make a motion.
You've heard the motion, the Majority Floor Leader's motion, that we return at 2:15. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? That motion is adopted. 2:15 PM. Committee announcements. Chairman, oh, I'm sorry, Chairman Newsom.
Let's see if this, does this thing work today? Cool. Committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources will meet in about 15 minutes. Grab your lunch downstairs, and we will be taking on House Bill 171, Notice of State Land Lease and Local Opportunities, House Bill 200, Non-Resident Hunting License Application Fees, and possibly some of the guided fishing boat regulation bills. Thank you.
Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to consider House Bill 239, House Bill 286, House Bill 268, and if time permits, House Bill 253.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, will meet in about 15 minutes in meeting room 3 downstairs to hear continuation of House Bill 156, voter identification limitations, House Bill 229, electronic payment of sales and use taxes, and House Bill 154, permanent vehicle registration.
Thank you. Chairman Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 1, Judiciary, will meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in our normal meeting room. We will finish up with the committee working House Bill 152, and then we will have House Bill 212, House Bill 231, time permitting, House Bill 241.
Chairman Eklund.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to re-refer House Bill 198 from Committee number 5, Agriculture, to Appropriations Committee number 2.
Okay, seeing no objection, House Bill number 198 is re-referred to Committee number 2, Appropriations. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your House Appropriations will continue on the working with House Joint Resolution 6, House Joint Resolution 7. We will also have the re-referrals of House Bill 88, Foreign Ownership of Agricultural Lands, House Bill 116, Prohibiting Foreign Property Ownership of Wyoming Lands, on adjournment this evening. Then, just to get folks in the queue on knowing what's coming up, we may not meet on Wednesday, just because depending on how many amendments you guys bring. But if you don't do too many, we can probably schedule other bills. Otherwise, on Thursday, on adjournment, we'll hear House Bill 284, House Bill 195, House Bill 270, House Bill 198, and House Bill 105.
Chairman Northrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Education will meet upon noon recess tomorrow, and we're going to be in E03. We're going to do House Bill 223. Wyoming Preschool Provider Grants, expulsion, House Bill 177, which is expulsion of for possession of a deadly weapon, and House Bill 192, Education K-12 Food Service.
Mr.
Sorry,
Chairman.
Vice Chairman Larson,
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor, if I may.
please proceed.
Folks, I hesitated doing this, but I'm going to anyway. You heard a great presentation on employee compensation. It was complex. But you need to know that particularly the presenter of that particular amendment, when we was hearing this in our December meetings, he's sitting there, he's just one of those guys that the math has to add up. And he kept asking questions and kept asking questions. And so we actually reduced it because we couldn't get the math to add up. So we go to our LSO staff, they says, we can't get the math. So we adopted a lesser amount. We says, we're not opposed to this whole effort on employee compensation, but the numbers have to work. And so during that holiday break, the agencies, and it was because they're dealing with vacancies and trying to adjust everything, they then come back in January and had those numbers fixed, and that's part of the reduction. But you just need to know that, or I want to just share with you that we have members on the Appropriations Committee that really dig into that stuff, and it's not just a stamp that says, okay, get whatever you want. They really have to earn a lot of this stuff, and I think that our good attorney that presented that is a great example of what we expect of our appropriators here from the body. So my hat's off to him.
Thank you, Representative Larson. We will return at 2:15 p.m.